Well, welcome to the first part in what's going to be a mini series for our digital production course. In this video, we're going to be going over how to navigate Maya, how to set up our main scene, and how to import our references for the model we're going to be working on this project, right? This is part one. It's going to be at least 5 or 6 parts spanning from modeling, UV mapping, texturing, lighting rendering, and eventually rigging. Right, the purpose of these videos is for you guys to have these references as we discuss or as we work in class. These are going to be explicitly tutorials on how to work with the programs. These are not theory tutorials outright, right? This is material that's going to be discussed in class. However, for your benefit, these videos are mainly going to be essentially which buttons to press where, right? Starting with Maya, the main program we're going to be working on during this class. I'm going to be showing you guys obviously how to navigate it and how to configure our scene. So first, I'm going to reset my scene, just reset our current workspace, and then start with the general workspace. So essentially, whenever you start Maya for the first time, it does open with a general workspace, which is the default. It kind of gives a bit of everything in terms of where, some tools, or we have the timeline underneath. And I like to configure or change it to the modeling workspace and do some changes there because it gives us access to more frequent tools that we're going to be using, and also UV mapping also has a couple tools directly tied to the modeling workspace. So for a bit of ease of access, we're just going to be configuring that starting this class. So what we do, we head on over to our general workspace, and then we swap that to our modeling standard workspace. And you'll see that we no longer have the timeline, and we have our modeling toolkit, which is where a lot of the tools that we use are going to be found. What I'm going to do now is turn on our outliner, which is going to give us a list of all the objects that are within our viewport, right? A little bit on the viewport later. And I also like to add the channel box and layer editor, which we're going to be using later. The beauty with this is that I can just drag and drop it next to our other tabs here. And I'm going to explain what each of these tabs are for, at least for the purposes of this class. Now, starting with our brief tour, after we've added, right, our outliner, and then we added our channel box, starting with our viewport, right? So 3D modeling software, the viewport is essentially going to be our canvas. Any object that we create, any light source, etc., is going to be seen here. Next up, we have our outliner, which is what we just turned on. And the outliner, what it does is essentially give me, well, a list of all of these objects that are going to be present in the scene. This is going to come in handy later on when we import our reference images as well. Next, right to our right, we have the modeling toolkit. This is going to give us some of the tools we're going to be using, right, just for ease of access. Most of them are going to be right here. Some of them are going to be hidden, and some of them are going to be shortcuts. We have the attribute editor, which gives us the ability to manipulate certain attributes based on what object we're selecting, either polygons or light sources, etc. And then we have the channel box and the layer editor right here. Channel box just gives us the numerical value of certain transformations that we do, so we can type them or visually see whenever we move an object, see that data that we can later copy or paste or fine tune as we're working. And underneath here, we have our layer editor that essentially allows us to create different layer stacks to separate specific components as we're working. We're going to be using this for our images later on. So to start, now how to actually properly navigate within Maya, what I recommend my students do is just associate the main buttons that you're going to be using. Essentially, we're only going to be using about 4 buttons for navigation. It's going to be the Alt key, right, next to the space bar, and then one of the 3 button mouses, specifically, right, left click, which is a regular click, right click, right, And then we have the middle mouse and the scroll wheel, right? We can hold down or press down the scroll wheel, and then we have our middle mouse. So in conjunction with the Alt key, we can rotate. If we use Alt and left click, we can use Alt and middle mouse to pan or track the camera up, down, left, right. And then if we want to zoom, we can use Alt and right click to zoom in and out. This gives us a bit of a smoother camera zoom versus the scroll wheel, which is a bit more snappy as we're working, right? Now, how do we actually interact with our objects, right? Now that we've sort of mastered mobility of the camera, how do we actually start interacting with our objects? So we can essentially use the shortcuts. We can use Q for selection. That allows us to select objects in our scene explicitly, right? We're going to see a little cursor right here, and we can click and select objects, right? If I have more than one object, I can click and drag to select them both. But if I want to be a bit more specific, I can hold Shift and add to my selection. Notice here I duplicated another cube, right? And I can hold Control to deselect objects. I can also use Shift to deselect, but I prefer using Control because we could also use it in the outliner. And if we hold Control in the outliner, we can specifically select objects versus Shift that basically selects the entire row, right? We can delete objects by pressing Delete, right? And we can duplicate them by pressing Control D. This also creates duplicates. If I want to move an object, we can press the W key, W or transpose, right? You'll notice that now we have this little gizmo that lets us move the object up, down, left, and right. And then we have the E key, which gives us rotation, right? I always recommend that you rotate the object on the axis that you want to specifically rotate towards, not use this axis to rotate because this is based on the camera position. This can give you some inaccurate results. Same with transpose. If you want to move an object up, I always recommend you move from the arrow you wish to move or direction you wish to move, rather than just grabbing it from the center and moving it up again. If you're doing this from this type of camera, it'll give you different or inaccurate results as you're working. And then lastly, in terms of transformation, we have the R key, and R allows us to change the scale of objects. If we use the center, we can universally change the scale, and we can use the Y or green for up and down, X for left and right, and Z, blue, for front and back. And this applies for movement, rotation, and scale, right? So that's our general navigation and how to manipulate an object. Let's say we also lose the object. This might happen, especially if you're moving around. You can press the F key to jump back into that selected object, right? Frame or focus your main object. So we're going to be learning as we work. Essentially, right now we're only manipulating the entirety of this object, but if we wanted to manipulate specific components, let's say I wanted to make this area taller than this area here, we need to actually select that region. And how this actually works, I'm going to be tying into setting up our scene first, and then we're gonna model our selected prop or character in this case, and I'm gonna go into those specific components, etc. So let me just delete this for now. And what I'm going to do first is import our reference images, right? In this case, I modeled or I drew the concept we're going to work on for this video series. But for the class that we're working on, or classes, we're going to be picking one submitted concept art by one of you guys and working with this one, and then you can use this video as a reference as we work. Now, first, I'm going to change my camera type from a perspective, and a perspective camera is literally just a camera that, well, has vanishing points. It sort of works like a real world camera, right? We can see the object from many different angles. And then we also have our orthographic cameras. And orthographic cameras, at least in this typing, are cameras that are locked to a specific angle, right? A front-facing camera, we have side-facing cameras, top-facing cameras, etc. We can access them from the Panels tab over here, or we can hold spacebar, hold click, and then pick the specific view we want to work on, or we can also, right, just release the mouse back to perspective. So I want to set up my scene. I'm going to import my references. These videos are also going to be rather brisk in terms of the material we're covering. Try to keep them short. So I want to directly import my reference. But to do this, I need to first set my orthographic cameras to import them properly. Otherwise, they might give me some issues or some undesired results right now. So we're going to go into our front view, and then I'm going to look for this image here, which is the image plane, right? This lets me import an image directly from a folder, right? And I have this folder set up to import our images. I didn't name my files, but right now I only have two images to worry about. We have our front facing angle of the concept we're going to be working on for this video series. And this little guy right here. And what I just did was with the W key, after I imported, I made sure to set the character's feet in this line right here, which is effectively our ground. And then to import the side view, I again could just hold spacebar, hold click, and then go to, I'm gonna go right view. Sometimes this confuses me a little bit, which view is the best. And then we're gonna go again, desktop, class videos, and then import our side view. Right, there we go, looking at him from the right. And then we're also gonna lift and make sure, right, that the feet are touching the ground. And to check our work, I can just hold spacebar again, perspective view, and then make sure that these images line up. I tried my best to make sure that both angles matched at least the major landmarks, like the top of his head, the bottom of his feet, and the level of the eyes. Now it's going to be a lot easier to essentially translate 2D image into a 3D model. So now that we have this set up, I want to be able to lock these images so that I don't accidentally move them around or delete them or, right, just mess around with their position in general. So what I'm going to do is head on over to our display, layers, and then create a layer from the selected images. And now what this does is that I can hide the visibility. And if I deselect them and I press this box twice, essentially go from blank to template to reference, if I try to select the images, I cannot do so. They're completely locked. And now I've successfully set up my main scene for the remainder of this video, right? I'm going to save, Control S, and I'm going to be saving directly into this folder right here, the classes folder. You guys should definitely have your own folder and organize all of your work. I'm going to be making a new folder here just to separate the images from the Maya files. So typically we just have one that's just called Maya. And then I'm going to name this one exercise size 1 and go ahead and save that. And now we've successfully, right, saved our scene and we're ready to work. So I'm going to head on over back to the front view and I'm going to create a cube. This is going to be our main starting shape. For a lot of models, you can start with just a primitive. And primitives are literally just cubes, spheres, cylinders, cones, right? That allows us to basically model anything. Cubes are going to be the more versatile shape, believe it or not. And right now I'm just going to scale this more or less to fit the proportions of the model, specifically the body. We're going to be adding the hands and feet later. And I'm going to make sure from the right view that the width is about the same, right? That's a pretty good starting point. I'm going to turn on the X-ray, this button right here, lets me see through the object. And now we're going to talk about what it is we're actually doing in this project. Right now we are doing polygon modeling, and polygon modeling, polygons are composed of three major components. We can access them either directly from the modeling toolkit. You'll see that right now we are in object mode. But if we hold right click, we can go from vertex, which are these points that connect the lines of the model. You can see I can move them around. We also have the edges, which are those lines that are connected by the vertices. And then lastly, we have faces that are these four lines, right, connected end to end, giving us the area within our main shape, right? Essentially, all of modeling boils down to moving, rotating, scaling, and then maybe deleting or adding some extra components. So we're going to be working with these tools as we go along. So now that I have more or less the shape, I want to be able to see both sides at the same time. So over here, we have our panel layouts. If we go back here, we can see one singular view. We can see four views at the same time from right here. And then what I want is the double-sided view so that I can work from one angle, but I can just reference the other sides as I'm working. Honestly, this is up to personal preference. Sometimes I like to work with just one camera, or sometimes I will go and have this type of setup where I can see two angles at the same time. Anyway, so starting out, something I kind of want to figure more or less once I have the general shape with just this cube, I want to start molding it into the shape of our character. Right now, we're going to be really limited because right now we only have about 8 faces in this character. And I'm going to be adding faces or more topology as I am working. But first, I want to make sure I'm only working on one half for efficiency's sake. And then we will mirror the other half of our character later. So to start, one of the first tools we're going to be using is the multi-cut. And the multi-cut, if I hold Control and Shift over my object, it allows me to create a line that goes all the way across. Notice that it says 50%, right? So I'm making sure that it is right smack in the middle so I can effectively select one region and delete it. And then I can press Q to go just selection, hold right click face, and then click and drag one side. And then I can confirm here that I'm only deleting this one side and then delete that region. Right. Now I only have to worry about this half. So I'm going to go in here and shape. Again, I'm mainly only focusing on the body. And you'll quickly notice that I sort of run out of resolution to work with, right? We can use the multi-cut once more to add more topology or more detail as we're working. And right now I'm just trying to get that front shape nice and lined up. I want to see the side view, so I'm going to hold spacebar right view. And here I'm just going to move these points back to sort of create the roundness of the body a little bit more. Something like that. Make sure these points are better aligned. Times where we run out of sort of the resolution, we can start adding lines, but I definitely recommend starting out with as few faces as possible. That'll give me the greatest amount of control over the model. So for example, right now I'm running out of resolution for, let's say, the belly and the backside. So now I can go in here, add another cut right around the middle there, and then move that forward, move that back, do some adjustments. And then I can add another line in the middle of the side profile. So now I can move this point and it doesn't distort the middle of the head. And then I can kind of check my work over in the perspective view, and you start noticing how now we're slowly but surely building that shape out. I want to have a region later for the arms and legs, but right now they're not super important. I just want to focus on the main volume of the body. Doing some tweaks here, pushing this region forward, pushing this region back. Right, so right now you notice that I'm only really using two tools, right? The multi-cut to generate a couple more lines across my model, and then I'm moving them with the transpose, right? Pressing W. Now I can add another line here, and this will give me again a bit more resolution for the overall roundness of the body. This is something you want to keep in mind as you work. Keep the resolution low. And that'll give you way better results. Just checking this out. Now the beauty of setting up the channel box is that I can turn this on and off, sort of check my work bit by bit, turn that back on. And if I want to see how this model might look like with a smooth subdivision added, I can press the 3 on the keyboard, not the number pad. And I start noticing that this shape is coming out nicely. And maybe we could refine this bottom line right here. So I'm going to press 1, and then I'm going to go hold control, add a null line right here. And this time I'm going to select all of these lines, or all of these vertices, I should say. And then pull them forward, and then I can pull these back. Actually, I might want to tweak these ones here. You'll notice that this could get real meticulous really quickly, which is why I'm trying to avoid adding too many lines from the get-go. Now you notice that when I press the 3, we kind of get that nice result going in. Now, we can start adding the feet just to see how that'll come along. And what I would do in this scenario, once I select these bottom faces, make sure I select all of them. Go ahead, go back to my front view. Let's Control E. Control E is for extrude or extrusion, and you can also find it over here in the modeling toolkit under components. And if I pull from this blue line right here, you notice that now I can create more geometry or extra faces. This is going to come with some complications now that we're only working on one side. Specifically, I've added extra faces in this region here. Now, depending on the model or the approach, this might be a desired outcome. But for now, you'll notice that this area might be a bit too large for the actual shape of the foot. So what I could do instead, let's go back again before that appears, or else I might create a extra extrusion. Press Control E, and then mess around with the offset first. And what this does is that it insets the face. Now you notice that this region here stays in place, and I'm more or less matching it according to where the foot sort of begins. I can also move this area around a little bit. Now I can reselect, and I can test by pulling this shape downwards like this. Notice that, again, running to that same issue here. So I'm just going to press Control E and make another extrusion for the foot, right? If you notice that the foot right now is a bit uneven, right? This face right here, or this line isn't necessarily matching. What I can do is just press scale and then scale from this top region. Usually whatever line is perpendicular to the edge, and you can pull that down and you notice how it's nice and straight now. Move this down. And then I can hold right click, vertex, and then move this foot right around this region. And if I want to test if this foot looks good or not, before I do that, let's make sure it also looks good from the side. Notice that the foot here, we can maybe push this region here, and then maybe push this back, pull that back a little bit, and then we can press 3 and test how it's looking. Not too bad. However, we can definitely do some adjustments here for this top foot here. So what I'm thinking is maybe selecting these lines, pull that down, push that a little bit forward. I'm going to be pressed smooth. Now you notice that it gives us that shape a little bit more. There we go. Tweak this up a little bit. Press 1, press 3 again to just check. And then from our front view, pressing 1, I want to make sure that this region here is a bit smoother. So click and dragging. I'm also clicking and dragging to make sure I'm selecting the back of the model. Right? Press 3. Now we're getting that nice round shape as we go along. And the arm and the horns are going to be a similar principle. So for the arm, I'm going to go to the right view and more or less identify where my shoulder starts, which would be this region right here. I can select these 4 faces, press Control E, and then play around with the offset. If you hold Control, you have, well, better control over the value. You're essentially going down another decimal point versus not holding Control, where you're moving in the tenths place, right? So you hold Control, and again, I'm sort of more or less picking where the shoulder would begin and doing some tweaking. I can move, and then I can hold E or R, sorry, for scale. Maybe make the arm or shoulder a bit larger, right? Now if we look at it from the front view, right, that feels about right. You can select this region. I could make it perfectly circular, actually, but I want to keep the overall surface for it to be the same as the shape of the body. Circularizing it, turning it into a circle, right? Which is essentially pressing this button over here. Might not give me a good result, considering that we have a bit of a slope going on here. You can twist, sort of. Right, actually, the circularize does give me a not that bad of a deformation. So we can just leave that as is, not bad. And then we can press Control E and extrude. Now you'll notice that since we did have a bit of a slope, the arm is going to shoot up at an angle. And, you know, it's not that big of a deal because what we can do is press W and then move that down. But you'll notice that we start losing some of that volume. So we could rotate as well, pressing E and putting the arm more or less in its place. Since he's got a bit of a chubby body, the arm might be touching the shape over here, but honestly, not that big of a deal for now. Might be a problem for rigging, but we can tackle that in other videos. Cut to present ones. I'm fighting with myself for this, but hey, I'm trying to one take this. Right, so right now I'm more or less trying to match the shape with the little definition that I have. Eventually for this arm, we're gonna want to add some extra lines if we later want to bend the right where the elbow would be, more or less where the shoulder is, and we can do something similar with the legs. Right now I kind of want to test how it looks. We press 3, Not a bad outcome. Let me scale this up a little bit. And then we can use the multi-cut to add some lines here. Actually, I would rather them actually match the position of the arm. So something else we could do is instead of holding Control and Shift, we can cut across. You just have to make sure that you're cutting from outside the mesh all the way to the other side, because if you stop at any point, this might break the geometry or create some n-gons that we want to avoid. Right now, I'm sort of matching the angle of where the elbow would be. And then if I double click on this line, I can select an edge loop, which is what we've just created, and press Control B to bevel that line, and then add another line to essentially create what will be the elbow or the joint where it would deform later. Now we press 3, we have it's a lot cleaner, this end result. All right, we could also do the same for the shoulder itself, where we have at least, usually the rule of thumb is wherever you have a joint, you want to add at least 3 lines, but I am trying to be careful here because if the lines are too close, they might create creases, for example, right here on the arm. So this is something that we might visit later on, especially when we subdivide the model. It might just give us the geometry we need anyway. Or we could add those lines after we've subdivided the model as well, because right now we are in a rather low poly state or low topology state, which is desirable at this point in the modeling process. We don't want the model to be too dense, especially now. Right now I'm doing some tweaks, adjusting, and then I can hold right click, select where the horns would start, and it would be the same principle. Again, this definitely will vary from uh, model to model, right? We might not be working on a horned creature for the project, but we definitely might have appendages. So it's still the same principle. So for the horn, you can select this region here, press Control E, play with the offset, and then we can select the edges and scale them down as well. If the scaling starts to deform the model like it's happening here, we could also try using slide by holding Control and Shift at the same time. And this, what it does is essentially move the component based on the surface instead of just moving the whole vertice, which could cause some deformation in the faces, right? Now I can select these faces once more or less match, right? Might want to move these actually a little bit, something like that. You just click and then move these around. And select this region here, Control E. And I'm using W instead of just the extrude. So I want to move the face precisely up, not necessarily what the extrude is giving me. And then I can look at it from the side. Now I can better position the horn itself. This might be a bit of a discrepancy here with the front and the side view. Right. Admittedly, concepting is not my strong suit, especially making character sheets. I mainly model them, but right, do have to be a little bit interdisciplinary in this field. So no fear, just model or draw what is needed at the time. It also prevents you guys from having excuses like, oh, I don't draw. Well, neither do I technically. And, right. So if the job requires it, you kind of have to do it. Going in here, Selecting these regions, that back. There are definitely better ways to make things like horns, but we're trying to maintain it. Obviously, for simplicity's sake, I don't want to overwhelm with too many tools. This process, but in and of itself, I can understand that it might be a bit overwhelming, especially for beginners. So I'm trying to maintain um, like limited amount of tools. You notice that I really haven't done anything too fancy, right? The slide might have been something extra. I want to see this without a model. And we can press 3. So we have a pretty good result. Right. Right now I want to make the foot a bit flatter, but also want to make sure that this transition here, when I do smooth it, it doesn't look too rough like we had later, right? Had a bit of a harsher edge, but I do want it for the foot. So what I can do here, if I want to maintain an edge relatively straight, I can hold Control with a multi-cut and add a line more or less pretty close to this line over here. And when I do smooth it, now you'll notice that this area stays sharp, which is what we want for like a flat foot. You can look around, make sure everything's making sense. What we are missing is the eye. The eye I would debate for now, maybe not working. We could do things like texturing. We're not going to be rigging it at any point for simplicity's sake. But if we did want to add that eye, same thing. We can extrude this region here, play with the offset, and then position where the eye socket would go. It's around this region here. We can add that there. And then maybe straighten this out. Right. Now we look at it from the right view. And we can make sure that these vertices are actually aligned for when, if you do make the eye, it falls in a better position. Though this might cause some deformation in the face itself. Notice that if I look at it from the perspective, these regions here are a bit deformed, so we do have to be careful with that. But if I select these faces, we can extrude inward, because then the eye, we can make it a separate shape. Usually eyes for 3D models, specifically for animation, are done as separate pieces of geometry because, well, you obviously want to be able to animate them independently for when you're looking around. We aren't, however, going to be working things like an eyelid. Again, don't want to complicate too much when we get to the rigging portion of the model. So something like this can work rather well. We can also delete this region if we're going to be adding an eye later. But he might look a bit spooky for now, so we can just leave this geometry. That we could also use, depending on the type of model we work on, we could leave this geometry and then texture this as a white color, and then the actual iris can be just a piece of geometry that we add extra, which could be an interesting approach. So to keep the option available, I'm just going to keep this eye shape. We're going to keep the extrusion here. And in future videos, we could decide how we're going to model this actual eye or texture this actual eye later on. Now that we have our main shape, I just want to make sure that in Smooth Preview, things like the horn, for example, are maintaining their intended shape. Here you'll notice that it's a little short and the curvature is sort of, right, this part is supposed to be taller than this region. So it's a good catch. That means we can just move this up a little bit into the side. And if need be, we could add a couple more lines to better reinforce our shape. For example, maybe another extra line in between these two, right? You do have to be careful with the smooth preview. I would recommend if you're doing more detailed modeling or changes, you definitely work with the smooth preview turned off because it does give you a false sense of security. By that I mean, let's take the horn for example. If I start doing things like this, say I wanted to make them bigger, I can fall into this trap of, oh, it's looking really good, right? Sort of getting that shape. You'll even notice that that's not necessarily true, right? We are having some artifacts here, and then when we turn it off, we end up with messes like this, right? So the smooth preview is definitely something you don't want to over rely on. It's something I toggle on and off in my personal workflow. Um, and then eventually we could just smooth the model outright. So to notice, for example, that maybe we could add a couple more lines running across so that we could better fit this shape. But for now, this is a pretty good result. I would like to first mirror over this geometry. So what I'm going to do is in object mode, I'm going to head on over to mesh and then we're going to mirror. And the default settings gave us a pretty good result. Press smooth now. I'm using good liberally here. Some of the issues that are apparent, immediately apparent, is that this region right here is a bit too sharp when we smooth them out. And then when we do the preview here, it's looking a bit too angular. So we can just, for example, grab this region here and push this back a little bit. Same with the backside. Deselect this one because right now you can think of it this way. I only want to move these vertices, not the top or the bottom one. Now we press 3, we have a much smoother result. So the reason that we are getting a bit of a weird shape here is that we have this 5-pointed stars. These are called poles, and they typically happen in regions such as these where we have a shift in the flow of the edges. Another problem that I'm noticing is that the smooth did give us some issues here. So you'll notice that right here we have sort of a pentagon going on here, right? This is an n-gon or an illegal polygon, as I like to call them. And we also have a sneaky vertex where we press 3. It's one that's really close to this point. This one we can just delete outright. Notice how it immediately fixes this region. Though for something such as this, we might want to use the target weld, which is this tool that's right next to our multi-cut. And the way the target weld works, you click and drag one vertex to the other, and it automatically welds it. And we can also check the backside, see if there's any weird topology issues going on, right? The mirror is not a perfect tool. Sometimes it gives us these sorts of issues in our model, which is why it's very important to double check before committing to things like smoothing, etc. Right? We can press a smooth preview and make sure that all the faces are nicely even distributed. I can go ahead and select our object in object mode. And once I'm satisfied with the smooth preview, by the way, gives me a preview of a subdivision of 2. Essentially, we can grab our mesh and divide it from, for example, 1 face to 4 to 8, so on and so forth. So if I go over to mesh, smooth, That's one subdivision added. The smooth preview gives us two. So the slider, two subdivisions. And this is, I would say it's rather on the higher side, but it does give us the detail we need um, for this model, right? This will vary from character to character, or it could vary from purpose to purpose, right? If this were for animation, which is the intended workflow, this topology is, right, it's not too bad. You could definitely work with it. For video games, it might be on the denser side, so that's something you have to keep in mind. We might have to work with like something like this for a video game where the topology is just good enough for deformation, because we have to keep performance in mind. And while we also have to do the same for animation, in animation, essentially we want to be able to have as much detail captured in the camera as possible, where in video games, performance takes a bit of precedence over that, although there are other tricks and avenues that allow models to look good in video games, to look high poly, even though they might not be necessarily. For our purposes, this is a pretty good topology starting point and also a good stopping point for this video, right? You'll notice that we did go over quite a few tools, but essentially it's going to be the same process over and over again, at least for the modeling stage. And you can apply this again for essentially any concept. You need to notice that maybe, looking this over before we finish, he shrunk a little bit, right, when we smoothed them. So something we could do additionally before we cap this off is do something like go over to the form. This is slightly more advanced, and then create a lattice. And then what a lattice is essentially just a big box that I can add some extra resolution to, and it allows me to deform large pieces of geometry as if it were a simple model. So notice how I can just grab these points here. I can basically fit our concept back into place without having to manually move individual vertices. There we go. And we only have to make him a little bit wider. Let's turn that off. And voila. Right. I can delete this by pressing, and delete this and this entire history right here by pressing this button, which is the delete by type history, which is just, you can think of it as a cache of all the actions you've done during the modeling process or when you deleted or created some extra stuff. Something I'm noticing here as well is that we didn't catch one of the vertices. And I can fix this without having to go back by just welding these points back together. Essentially, right now we have a bit of a triangle here. So we can delete this whole region and then merge these points together. We can use this button right here called the merge to center. And then press the G key to reduce or repeat, sorry, the last step. Notice that now all of these lines are flowing in the same direction. We've had our mesh complete, but we have to re-delete that history. And also we can freeze our transformations, which are essentially all the changes we did to our box all the way back from when we started with our cube. Go ahead, freeze that, and now this scale is set. His proportions, his size, rotation, etc. are all, right now if I move it, I can just type 0 again, and he goes back to this original starting point. And then lastly, I can move his pivot over to the bottom by holding D and then the letter X to snap that to the grid. And now our pivot is in our center. This allows us to now scale him up and down without him going through the floor. And we can also do swatch and stretch for animation, right? So that should be it for this section. The later videos are going to include things like UV mapping, texturing, lighting, rendering, and rigging.